Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 187 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today, you're in for a real treat because I have with me my good friend Francine McKenna. Francine has recently moved over to Washington, D.C. to work for the Wall Street Journal in their Market Watch unit, and she is a transparency reporter. She brings all of her professional expertise as a public accountant to CPA, and of course her writing on her blog site, Ray the Auditors. It's a very interesting position that Francine has taken, and I look forward to reading her stuff going forward. Coupled with the current folks that are working there, it should be a very interesting and informative unit they have in place. I'd also like to remind you about my upcoming FCPA Masterclass training in Houston, Texas on September 10th and 11th. This will be the top nuts and bolts FCPA class in the U.S., and I hope that you can attend this class. If you need some more information, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. You are in for a real treat today because I have with me Francine McKenna. In addition to being one of my favorite people and good friends and person that I read on a regular basis, she has moved over and taking her varied skills, very large skills, I should say, to the Wall Street Journal at Market Watch, where she is the transparency reporter. And I've been dying to get her on the podcast to find out about this new gig. So with that somewhat long-winded introduction, Francine, welcome, and thanks a lot for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for being interested in what I do.
Well, I've always been interested in what you've done. You had one of the top blogs I read about auditors called Ray the Auditors, and you purloined your considerable auditing experience into a blogging and greater social media experience for people like myself. But tell me how you got to the Wall Street Journal and Market Watch.
Well, about a year ago, after blogging and working freelance for Forbes and American Banker and other publications, anyone who was interested in accounting and audit and scandal and fraud and the things that I was writing about, I started thinking, it was time perhaps to go into an organization and had the experience of working in a newsroom next to other people. I had been working freelance for about almost 8 years, and although things were going well and I was doing a lot of work, it's sort of hard. You get isolated, and I thought it was a good time to be around other people, learn from them, have a regular editor, basically get an opportunity to learn. You get stopped out when you're working on your own too much.
Well, what is your role as a transparency reporter? I guess first, what is Market Watch, and then what's your role as a transparency reporter?
Sure. Market Watch is the online entity of the Dow Jones family, which includes Dow Jones Newswire, Wall Street Journal, Barron's, and many other publications and services. It's the online focus on the retail investor. So we do a lot of news about equities, the bond market, market data, the Fed. So my colleagues here in Washington, D.C. are very focused on things like the Fed, jobs numbers, payroll numbers, all of the economic indicators, et cetera. But they were looking for someone to do broader stories, to do what they call second-day analysis and enterprise stories, someone who could bring a broader experience and sources and do sort of the next step. So the Wall Street Journal might do the day one story. Something happens. There's litigation. The SEC does something like Tuesday when they announced this big indictment against these hackers. And they do that straight story. I do the second day story. What's a unique angle? What's something that they didn't get a chance to tell you about yet? What's something that's happened before that's related to this particular story? And I had an opportunity, or I found out about the opportunity via Twitter. So it all sort of comes together. After many years of being on that platform, I think it's in April it'll be 8 years on Twitter. The bureau chief here in Washington, D.C. for MarketWatch, Steve Goldstein, is someone that we followed each other. He knew my work. And when I saw that he was looking for someone like this, I said, would he be willing to consider me? And he said, as long as you're willing to move to Washington, D.C. And it was just a really nice combination of the scope of the work plus an opportunity to move and be in a new place and start, some new things. And we made a decision together pretty quickly.
That's great because I don't know if you recall, but you and I actually met on Twitter back in 2010. And Twitter, even to this day for me, is a powerful platform, both in terms of communicating information and also receiving back information from my various feeds. So I tell people it was really Twitter that put me on the compliance map. So it's great that you're able to continue to use the tools of social media that we started with some time ago, and they're still relevant for you today.
Well, as you know, that's one of the mottos in my profile, using the tools instead of the tools using me. And that was sort of a mantra for working freelance and not being in the large firms and large organizations. I had 25 years of experience working for the big four public accounting firms and consulting and some other companies. And I went freelance and started writing just sort of to be on my own and to use all of these new tools to establish your own presence, to use your skills, to use your experience, and to sort of chart your own course without sort of the overhead of a large organization. But here I am back again, signed up with News Corp and the Wall Street Journal and Rupert Murdoch, and there's probably not too many other bigger media organizations. But I feel I'm in sort of a small, very neat niche here in Washington, D.C. and here at MarketWatch, and they're very supportive of the work that I've done in the past and the work that they think I can do going forward.
My guess would be that your professional background and your skill set might be a little bit different than many of your colleagues at MarketWatch. If that's a fair statement or assessment, what do those skills that you have in your 25 years from Big Four public accounting and then your, 8 or 10 years as a freelancer and running your own social media platform, what's that allow you to do in this new role?
Well, even though I'm what you would consider a mature professional, I'm 53, I started writing in the digital environment, so digital first. I was never a print reporter, and I think that that's helpful because that is what much of it's all about now, and it's helpful to have those skills. So having created your own blog, having promoted it, having grown it, having promoted your own work using all of the social media tools, it's very comfortable for me. In fact, I would feel lonely without it if I was in a writing job where that wasn't necessary or wasn't considered important. But you're right. My colleagues here have slightly different backgrounds in that they're mostly career journalists. They have journalism backgrounds, but the thing we have in common is that we're all sort of mature professionals. They've been at this a very long time. The tenure here is very high. People have been in these roles 10, 15, 20 years at the Wall Street Journal, at MarketWatch, at similar media organizations. And so I have a lot to learn from them about how this job is done, how to cultivate sources, how to just get around in the world, especially in this sort of strange environment here in Washington. So we share that as being sort of tenured professionals, but in different ways, and they, I think, like the fact that they have a CPA on board. We write about companies all the time. We write about earnings. We write about strange things that happens in companies. And this is not the first time that somebody has said it's really nice to have somebody who can read a set of financial statements and knows what that's all about. And that always surprises me because it isn't an easy thing to pick up, by the seat of your pants. But many journalists do if they get to stay on a beat long enough and they get to focus on it. They get very good at reading financial statements and sticking their nose into frauds and into accounting manipulation, et cetera. There's a lot of investigative journalists that have never had a business course, but they've been at it long enough. I bring sort of the academic and the practical discipline of seeing it many, many times before, having been involved in those companies or been involved in implementing the systems, et cetera.
We could turn now, Francine, to some of the things that have sort of piqued your interest over the past few months since you've been at Market Watch. Obviously, FIFA scandal occurred in June. In July, we had the Toshiba scandal. Who knows what August will bring us in terms of scandals or indeed other large events, but have those or other events kind of piqued your interest or caused you to do this second day analysis writing that you've gotten into a little bit?
Well, one that has piqued my interest, but I haven't been able to write about it yet, is Petrobras. And the other is Ernst & Young. And some issues related to News Corp itself. So the old scandal related to Walmart and Ernst & Young, and it was reminiscent of the fact that there were a couple of bribery cases where Ernst & Young was the auditor, and up until that point, the auditors had not had any scrutiny on their role in the situation. And there's been a couple of cases now recently, like Ernst & Young being mentioned with regard to the Walmart case and PwC being sued with regard to the Petrobras case, where all of a sudden people are saying, there's this major foreign bribery situation, there's, massive controls breakdowns. Where were the auditors in terms of looking at these situations or letting them get past them? So I think that that's an interesting development that we're seeing. I don't know how far it's going to go and how quickly, but in Petrobras, it's pretty phenomenal, the scale of that situation. I just haven't had a chance to tackle it. My beat here is broader than what I was writing about independently. So as opposed to the business of the Big Four and a little bit of fraud and scandal and bribery and corporate governance, now it's financial regulation and legislation from a transparency perspective. So looking at any of the agencies and any of the activities around Congress and the Senate where financial legislation is being developed or financial regulation is being developed, and talking about the relationships between the agencies and the relationships between people and past situations, and trying to bring some context to those stories.
Of course, being from Houston, I still remember living through Enron. That led to WorldCom and some other accounting scandals. And certainly, we all remember Arthur Andersen in Houston and what happened to them as a result of Enron. But I find it actually a logical extension of now FCPA or bribery and corruption scandals that people would at least start questioning the auditor's role. And I wonder if we'll see that same sort of arc we saw from late 1990s, early 2000s in terms of scrutiny on the now Big Three.
Even more refreshing is there's additional scrutiny on the internal auditors. So it may not be a positive scrutiny, but it's positive in terms of they're there, they have a role, they should be doing certain things, we should be making sure that they're strong. And so there's been a couple of cases where we're talking specifically about internal auditors, their reports, their lack of reports, the fact that their reports weren't paid attention to soon enough or seriously enough. And I think that that's pretty refreshing, and I know that Richard Chambers over at the IIA is very excited about that. So he's been tuned up on cases like Toshiba, and I always mentioned the J.P. Morgan whale case, where the internal audit function at J.P. Morgan was mentioned in the enforcement orders as being one of the significant weaknesses of that situation.
Right, and from the FCPA world, we're all still watching to see if there's any further fallout from the Avon FCPA enforcement action.
Mm-hmm.
where the head of internal audit actually squelched the report and request for additional investigation by his internal audit team in China, and to see if there's any criminal sanctions or other sanctions put on him, because there's been no individual prosecutions out of Avon yet. So that's absolutely a very good insight to see, and the way I love the way you phrase that as refreshing, because it's not simply, auditors behaving badly. This is a function that's an important function within a company, and it needs to have not only proper oversight, but proper viewing and proper access to the board of directors or other appropriate levels of governance that can make those decisions and lead those investigations if necessary. So it's very good insight. Thank you.
In particular, when there's an internal investigation, because the internal audit function should be more involved than the external audit function. I think you and I have talked about that a lot. The external auditor should never be involved in an internal investigation, especially if there's any question that anybody at a senior or a C-level is involved. The conflict of them having to review information about an investigation in terms of the impact on the audit, and the conflict of being involved in that investigation and looking at it from a liability perspective for the company or for executives that are under scrutiny is just too much. They have to do their job that they were hired for first, which is to be the external auditor and to be the watchdog for shareholders and the markets.
Does any of your new role intersect with the COSO 2013 framework, its implementation, or issues that might arise out of that?
Well, perhaps. There is certainly a lot of SEC enforcement activity that is focusing on internal controls. So whether it's a FCPA case or whether it's the cases in the banking world or financial services world, there have been many, many, many more mentions of internal controls, and certainly the references is to COSO. And it's something that, again, I haven't had a chance to write a story that makes a good connection with the COSO, the new COSO framework and the implementation. But that's something that's out there, and that I think we're going to see more and more. And I think people like the SEC and other regulatory agencies are becoming more familiar with this language and with using it. I used to see, whether it was private or public litigation, they were afraid to talk about internal controls. They were afraid to talk about the PCOB. They were afraid to talk about, the concepts that really should be the infrastructure and the foundation for the kinds of expectations they have from a regulatory perspective. And they were afraid to talk about that. And I think they're becoming more comfortable in realizing that these are tools in order to strengthen their enforcement and their monitoring.
Have you thought about or sort of looked at the issue of, after a set of internal controls are designed and then implemented, testing the effectiveness and the intersection of that and the traditional functions of internal audit?
I have not had an opportunity to look at that much recently, other than, again, as I said, when they're mentioned in enforcement orders, and they are mentioned more and more and more in SEC and other enforcement orders. So you're looking at this expectation that the controls are not only designed well, but they're actually operating. And I think that that's something that that awareness is increasing every day.
I know, at least in my study of the literature, the testing of those controls seems to be the focus of many accounting and audit professionals now. And I know companies are looking at how can we test and how can we show effectiveness. So I'd be very interested to see where that discussion moves forward as well. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think what's also very interesting is that I've been cultivating over the years relationships with the academics and with PhD students who are working under the academics in the accounting and finance departments of all the universities. I go out and visit the universities and the accounting students in particular. And in the beginning, they weren't doing research that was current in my mind. They were still using data from pre-Sarbanes-Oxley. They were not thinking about the policy decisions that we need answered today. And instead, I'm seeing more and more research that's getting done more quickly, that's more timely. They're picking the right topics. So, and that's translating into the regulators like the PCAOB and the SEC asking for not custom research, but very tailored research to answer questions that they need answered from a policy perspective. So great cooperation between the academics and the regulators. And a recent speech that was given by Jeanette Franzel, one of the board members at the PCAOB at the AAA, the American Accounting Association annual meeting last week, is indicative. She was talking about internal controls over financial reporting, their inspections of auditors' audits of internal controls over financial reporting, and saying that they're seeing, unfortunately, that too many auditors are still struggling with those audits. And unfortunately, those opinions are sometimes changed when they realize that they missed something and the company had a misstatement or a restatement, and they gave them a clean opinion prior to that. Really profound research that was done in conjunction with some additional support they've been getting from the University of Chicago and their own internal research, and the fact that they have almost 12 years of inspection data available. So ICFR is a very hot issue because there's been concerns on the part of the business community that the auditors are using it as a cudgel to extract more fees.
Right.
The PCAOB, the regulator, says, on the contrary, we're not seeing auditors do it well, and if that means they're spending more time and wasting your client's money, then your client should be demanding more from your auditors because they need to do it, and it's very important. And when they miss it, you get a restatement or you get a material misstatement that should not have been missed if they're doing their job.
You know, you tied all that together brilliantly. I wish I could be that articulate when it comes to accounting and internal audit issues. Unfortunately, we're at the end of our time. I could probably go on the rest of the afternoon to keep your brain, but I was wondering if someone wanted to follow up with you directly or had any questions about any of the points you've raised. Could they contact you, and if so, how would they do it?
Sure. I'm on Twitter at ReTheAuditors, R-E, the Auditors, and you can reach me at MarketWatch at fmckenna@marketwatch.com.
Well, Francine, always a pleasure, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. I hope you enjoyed my visit with Francine McKenna. As a call to action, I would ask you if you could go to iTunes and rate this podcast. That helps in our ratings going forward. Also, I'm preparing my next mailbag episode, so if you have any questions, please email them to me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. I've got a good list, and I'm getting ready to host my second mailbag episode. Finally, don't forget about the FCPA Masterclass training in Houston on September 10th and 11th. If you have any questions, you can contact me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Thanks very much, and I look forward to visiting with you again.